Morning and warm welcome, everyone. Our today's topic is finalization of accounts with GST perspective. I'm looking forward for today's session, considering how difficult it becomes later when one has to match the financials with the data on the GST portal. So it's my honor to introduce our today's speaker, CA Ramesh sir, CA S Ramesh sir. Sir is a graduate in economics from Vivekananda College, Chennai in 1978. He's a qualified chartered accountant, of course, in since November 1982 and commenced his practice in early 1983. He is currently a partner in SRBR and Associate LLP. He passed the Information System Audit exam conducted by ICAI in September 2002, securing All India 10th rank. He is empaneled as a peer reviewer with the peer review board of the ICAI. He has presented books on bank audit, accounting standards, auditing and assurance standards, and peer review at several CPE seminars organized by SIRC and branches. He has presented papers at seminars organized by Chambers of Commerce. He has contributed articles in CA journals and SIRC newsletters. He has co-authored a book on bank audit. He is a faculty member for training program organized by CAG Office Chennai, IOB Staff Training College, Tamil Nadu, Commercial Tax Department, etc. Sir, there are many things in your profile which almost every one of us would like to have, and some may already have also. But one thing that I would like to have immediately, that you have donated blood 40 times in last 12 years. That is almost more than 3 times a year. That's simply superb, sir. And I will definitely get myself registered to the nearest blood bank and do my bit as well. Thank you for inspiring on this part as well. With this, I would request CAS Ramesh sir to take over from here and start his deliberation. Thank you.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Salutations to all my gurus, without whose help and guidance, I wouldn't be what I am today or where I am today. Thank you so much, Mr. Sachin, for those kind introduction and the kind words regarding blood donation. I got interested in blood donation when I was 25 due to a tragic incident at home. I got interested in it, and I think one has to be in a gap of about 3 months from one blood donation to another. So invariably, every quarter, some hospital or other, most likely the Child Trust Hospital in Chennai would call me for a donation. So, and since I was A1 positive, which is not so easily available, that's the reason why I got very involved in it. Unfortunately, now they're telling me that I can't donate as I used to before, because I'm 62 now. So maybe for another 2-3 years, I will manage to do 2 or 3 more donations. I hope to do at least another 5 donations in the next year. Thank you so much for your kind words. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with all of you with the Andheri Oshiwara CP Study Circle on a Sunday morning. It's essentially not very easy to get people to attend a webinar or a seminar on Sunday morning, and I think it's extremely nice to see at least 40-50 participants already logged in. And I think the whole idea of holding these webinars, because during this pandemic time, is really paying off with so many webinars being held every day. But still, Sunday is a special day, and on a day of Sabbath, taking time off from the family, which is the day in which we all as professionals get to spend quality time with the family, taking time off from that and logging in to hear me speak, really elates me, and I'm thankful to the study office bearers and the members of the study circle. As you can see, the topic for the day is finalization of accounts with GST perspective, and I intend to point out during the course of audit of the financial statements of an entity, the auditor should look at various line items with the objectives of compliance with GST laws and regulations. While the audit report under both GST law and income tax law is to be filed after the financials are filed with the ROC, it is imperative that an auditor keeps in mind the requirements of 2 acts in order to ensure that there are no major surprises while conducting the tax audit or the GST audit. In fact, typically the right thing Mr. Verma spoke about. We finish the financials, And later on when we do the GST audit, we find that the turnover does not match the GST portal, the ITC does not match the GST portal. How is it that we need to avoid this? Now it's very difficult to avoid this unless we do the GST audit before. But I would certainly like to say that even if the GST audit per se is not completely possible, I think we need to at least 75 to 80% of the GST audit in terms of reconciliation, and also look at the line items in the profit and loss account to see whether there is some element of GST that could be attracted to this line item, and how do we guard against a surprise at the time of doing the GST audit. A few comments, disclaimers before launching into the subject matter. This is not a discourse on GST Act or rules. I am not an expert in the subject, and I leave it to the experts and more learned faculty for another day. The aim of this presentation is to highlight the ways and processes of looking at the impact of GST on various line items in the financial statements. The views expressed here are completely my personal views and are not the views of the study circle member and study circle, Andheri Oshiwara Study Circle or the ICAI. What am I going to cover in this session? We'll first look at the books of accounts. Then we'll look at the financial statements. While we look at the books of accounts, we will look at how there might be differences between the books of accounts and the GST returns, and why a reconciliation is a must to understand the nature of the differences. We will then look at the financial statements and understand how GST impacts most line items, including some line items which may apparently look as if they have no impact on GST. You will also see that some items the director's report will help us to cross-check compliance with GST law, similar to the case with notes to accounts. A review of the internal audit report will help us to understand the existing controls on GST accounting and the efficacy of its function. This will assist the auditors to decide the scope of verification and aid in reporting on internal financial controls in the case of corporates. Please let us all remember that internal financial control reporting has now come to stay. And so if we are doing the audit of corporates, we certainly need to comment on that. And most often we find that there are some comments in the notes on accounts, but the IFCR report is clean. We'll come to it at a later part of my presentation. Certain items in the tax audit report will also help us in checking reversal of ITC and other compliance with GST. And finally, we look at the GST impact on year-end closing adjustment entries, which although routine in nature, will impact the financials if the GST component of those closing entries is not accounted for properly. Let us now compare the ledger accounts in the books of accounts with the corresponding GST returns. However, before going to comparison, I would like to draw your attention to section 35 of the Act, which states that every registered person shall keep and maintain at his principal place of business, as mentioned in the certificate of registration, a true and current account of, and they've listed 6 items there. But what we really need to understand, the books of accounts are to be maintained in the place mentioned in the GST certificate of registration. Invariably, it happens that there is an address in the certificate of registration. The address that we fill in the 3CD is different, and the address in the financials, if there is an address that is being typed in, is different. Let us ensure that the addresses in all the documents are correct, especially the tax audit report and the GST audit report should contain the address which is mentioned in the GST certificate and not anything else. Provided, what happens if there are 2 places of business? One, let us say in Chennai, and the other in Coimbatore, in Tamil Nadu. So it's a branch. Then both the addresses should be available in the certificate of registration. If it is not available, please ask your clients to register both the places in the certificate of registration. And the books can then be maintained in both the places. And both these addresses should actually figure in your 3CD. It should be mentioned, both the addresses should be mentioned in the tax audit report. If we do miss it out, then what happens is there is a misnomer, there is a clarification asked for, and lots of other complications it can arise. The books can, according to the Act, the books can be maintained in electronic form. There's nothing which says it should only be in physical form. It can also be in electronic form. Although I don't really understand why this was put in the Act, since today, literally 100% of all businesses have moved to electronic maintenance of books, and I don't see any business entity maintaining books of accounts on a manual basis. Coming to ITC, the GST input tax credit in the financial books, we probably have a ledger account called ITC, which can be compared with the credit ledger in the GST portal. Now, typically these two should match. The balance in my books should match the credit ledger in the portal, but invariably they don't. And why don't they match? Because of various differences. Let us look at some differences. Condition of claim has not yet been fulfilled. An item has been purchased, let us say on the 28th of January. The seller has uploaded the return and it figures in the 2A. But what happens is the goods reach only in February. The invoice also reaches in February, or even if the invoice does reach before in January itself, since the goods don't reach in January, reach only in February, the buyer can account for it only in February and the ITC can also be accounted only in February. Now that ITC can be used only to discharge the liability of February and cannot be used to discharge the liability of January. Although in the electronic portal, it can come in, or it is already available in 2A because the seller has uploaded. This is a difference that can come in. Second, rule 36(4) is being complied with, and ITC is not claimed unless it is reflected in GSTR 2A. So although I have accounted it, it does not appear in 2A, and therefore I did not claim ITC credit, which means there will be a difference between my books and the electronic portal. 10% adjustment account also can be maintained. This is another reason which can lead to a difference between the books of accounts and the GST portal. Excess cash paid, if any. Excess cash paid as per books should normally tally with the cash ledger in the GST portal. However, differences can arise due to cash paid adjusted in the GST portal, but entry not passed in the books of accounts. The second reason why you can have a difference is GST TDS is available in the portal, which has been accepted and therefore goes to the cash ledger, but corresponding entry has not been passed in the books. In fact, in case any of you have done the bank audit this year, please look at the GST portal. Your TDS, GST TDS has already been uploaded. It is available there. Please accept it. File the return. The minute you file the return, it will immediately within 1 minute or 2 minutes, it comes into your cash ledger, and you can use that to offset your GST liability. So these are differences which can come. You have not accounted for GST TDS in the books, but you have accounted for it in the portal because it is available. You have filed it. There can be a difference. Vice versa. Because you have received a payment from the bank or the person who is paying, GST has been accounted in the books. But in the portal, have you gone and looked at the GST, TDS and TCS statement? Have you accepted it? Have you filed the return? If you have not, till you don't file, then it will not come into the cash ledger of the GST portal, and there will be a difference between the two. The difference can also come due to a totally different reason. Let us say the authorities have raised a demand through DRC 07 for insufficient or incorrect payable. I'm just taking an example. They can raise a demand for several things. One of the things is for incorrect or insufficient e-waybill, the goods are detained and the demand is raised to the department in, let us say, DRC 07. The auditee pays the money, pays the demand through a PMT 06 challan, and accounts it as penalty in the books of accounts. The challan is produced to the authorities and invariably the goods are released. Typically, the authorities are expected to release it only after you file a DRC 03, which will offset the payment with DRC 07. As long as this DRC 03 is not filed, it will continue to be in the cash ledger and it will not get adjusted against the DRC 07. But the authorities are happy the minute you produce a DRC 03 challan to them saying that it is evidence of having paid, and they release the goods. This is the situation where you would have accounted for it in the books of accounts. You also paid the money, but it remains the cash ledger because you have not filed the DRC 03. The vice versa is also possible. DRC 03 is paid, is filed with the department, therefore the DRC 07 gets cancelled out. But in the books, the accountant fails to transfer the money from the cash paid account to the penalty account, and therefore it continues to be in the cash paid account. These are differences which we need to look at. As far as the turnover is concerned, GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, this is what we'll compare. For the GST liability, you will look at the GSTR 3B, ITC refund receivable. Quite often we come across cases in the auditor's books that there is a refund claim pending from the GST. Now the client continues to say it is pending. has a refund application been made? What is the status of the refund application? Is something which we can easily find out the minute we log into the GST portal and look at the refund application status. That will give us an idea of whether the refund is still pending, or has it been received, or has there been a difference between what has been claimed and what has been received. Turnover versus GST liability. This is not, of course, a ledger. It's not really a ledger account in the books, but it is a analysis we do, and that we can compare with the credit and liability statement in the GST portal. We will now move to the review of the financial statements. There are several reasons why turnover as per books and the value of outward supply in the GST portal will not match. Let us take a look at a few examples. Goods are invoiced on March 28th. However, the risk and reward passes only in April. Revenue cannot be recognized according to the accounting standards and the risk and reward has still not passed. So, although I have raised a GST invoice and it has been accounted on the books, for the purpose of preparing the financial statements of the year, I will not recognize that particular invoice because the risk and reward has not passed on to the customer as yet. What happened with GST? The invoice is reached GST and therefore it is part of taxable turnover for the month of March. The liability has to be discharged in April. But if you look at the annual accounts of that entity, this will be a reconciliation item. This cannot be in the part of turnover for the purpose of financial statements, because the accounting standard says you cannot recognize that revenue since the risk and reward has not passed on. So where do you keep that? Where do you keep that? You can either say unbilled revenue or unearned revenue, whatever it is. It has to be moved away from sales and has to be kept in another account because it cannot be part of turnover for the purpose of accounting standards. Since we all have to comply with accounting standards, even if we are signing the financials of a non-corporate, we need to look at this and we need to see that it has been accounted properly. Once the accounting has been done according to the accounting standard, there could be differences, especially with regard to sales that has happened in the last week of the closing month of the year. Maybe it might not be so relevant this year because there were no sales after the 23rd of March in most companies, and therefore it might not really have an impact. But even there, we found in a case where goods were dispatched on the 22nd of March, 23rd we started lockdown in Chennai, 22nd it has been dispatched. It's stuck in the lorry godown. It is still not moved. It moved only sometime in May, which means again the risk and reward is not passed on. We need to de-recognize that income from the turnover as per books, but it will certainly form part of taxable turnover in the GST portal. Advances received for services to be rendered will certainly not form part of turnover as per books. However, this will be included in the taxable value in GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B. Analysis of advance received both in the books and GST paid as per the portal is certainly a must. We need to do this reconciliation. In fact, we came across a very strange case in one of our auditees, where one of the clients we were auditing, where an advance had been received in the month of November 2019. GST has been properly calculated on it. The liability has been discharged through 3B, also been accounted for in GSTR 1. But what happened was the work was completed in Jan. The marketing department or the contracts department did not inform the accounts department that the work is over. As a result, an invoice was never raised. When we were doing the audit sometime in May or June, online audit, we said, why is this advance pending from November? Is the work over or not? And then only they woke up and said, it is over, which means an invoice should have been raised in the month of January when it was over, so that this could have been offset. There's no great liability, but there is a difference between keeping something in the liability side as advance received rather than as part of turnover for the purpose of books. So we had to necessarily pass those correction entries to ensure that the turnover in the books was properly reflected. What I would like to impress upon all of you is, if there is an advance, if you have clients who are receiving advance for services to be rendered, please look at those final closing advances pending in the books, see whether the work is completed, see whether an invoice should have been raised. If it has not been raised, ask them to raise an invoice, or even and then complete the audit. Otherwise, you could have a situation where the turnover as per financial statements is understated, and if it is material, it might even affect the true and fair view of the financial statement that you are signing. In the case of construction contracts, revenue is recognized on the basis of percentage of completion method. This is what we do in the books. For the purpose of books, we recognize revenue on the basis of percentage of completion method. Whereas under GST, as and when a progressive bill is raised, GST must be charged and disclosed as outward supply. Let us take an example to understand this. The contract value is 10 lakhs. The estimated cost of the contract is 9 lakhs. As per GST, stage-based billing, the first stage is over. The amount to be billed is as per the contract between the contractor and the person who is doing the contract is 2,50,000. This 2,50,000 becomes the taxable value of the outward supply on which GST is to be charged and accounted for, and the liability is discharged. So 2.5 lakhs is the value of the invoice that the contractor has raised, and that is what will come in the GST portal as turnover. But is that the value? Is that the turnover for the purpose of books? That is not the turnover for the purpose of books, because for the purpose of books, it will have to be under the percentage of completion method. And the formula for percentage of completion method is cost incurred by total cost into the value of contract. In the example that I just gave you, cost incurred till that stage, let us assume the cost incurred till that stage is 3 lakhs, then the turnover as per POCM method would be cost incurred 3 lakhs divided by total cost, which is 9 lakhs, into the value of the contract, which is 10 lakhs, which will work out to 3,33,000 and odd. So this 3,33,333 will be the turnover as per books, whereas as per the portal, it will only be 2,50,000. We certainly need to have a reconciliation for this. This reconciliation, if we do not have, it will be put to pains to explain the difference both for the income tax purpose and for GST purpose. 2. Today, we are reading news items regarding exchange of information from the income tax department on the GST portal. Typically, it looks as though an income tax officer, from whatever I read in the press, it looks as though an income tax officer can log into the GST portal and gather the information of that particular assessee, which means we need to ensure that the figures do not vary between the two arms of the government, and if they do vary between our financials and the figures given in these two portals, we need to have a reconciliation to explain why there was this difference and what we have done is right. You could also have a difference in turnover because of foreign exchange fluctuations. Typically, if you are into business, into export business, then there will be lots of fluctuation problems. One of the problems is the turnover between books and turnover as per portal. Now, what is the rate at which a foreign exchange transaction should be accounted for in the books of accounts? It is normally the rate on the transaction date. But is it the only rate that I can apply in my books? Which means on a daily basis, should I look at what is the rate, what is the transaction rate on that day and start accounting my books on that date? Not necessarily. The accounting standard, AS 11, paragraph 10, and Ind AS 21, paragraph 22, both of them say you don't necessarily have to use only the transaction rate. For practical reasons, a rate that approximates the actual rate at the date of transaction is often used. For example, an average rate for a week or a month might be used for all transactions in each foreign currency occurring during that period. However, if exchange rates fluctuate significantly, the use of the average rate for a period is unreliable. So it means the accounting standards give me a certain amount of leeway. It does not say that I need to go only with the transaction rate as on that date. I can take an average rate which I can apply for a week, a month, or even a quarter. Now, what is this average rate? Where do I get this rate? It is not a rate that is available readily. There are sites which will give you that rate. This rate is arrived at based on the past experience and the future projections of the fluctuations between various foreign currencies in the world. This rate is arrived at very scientifically, and normally the variation between that rate and the daily rate is minimal. Of course, if the variation is high, then you probably need to revise your average rate. there are several companies which adopt an average rate and not a daily rate. So they account for, let us say, a month, they will account based on a particular rate, irrespective of the daily fluctuations in that rate. Now, is that the rate at which the GST invoice should be raised? That becomes a critical question here. For GST purposes, the exchange rate to be adopted is the rate notified in the section 14 of the Customs Act. This rate is announced for on a monthly basis with the customs authorities, and it is valid for 1 month. And at the end of every month, the rate is revised by the customs authorities. Now, let us say on the 1st of February, the rate fixed by the Customs Act, the notification issued in the Customs Act by the customs authority is, let us say, 78 rupees 50 paisa to a dollar. I am adopting a rate, average rate for the month of February based on historical data and the future projections, which is 78 rupees 5 paisa. This 45 paisa difference can lead to a significant difference in turnover between books and the portal. This is the difference for which we need to have a recon. In fact, if you're looking at Ind-AS accounting, where the functional currency is not INR, then this difference will even be more, and we need to watch out for that. However, please note that as per the GST rules, the rate to be adopted, which is the customs rate, is only for the purpose of goods and not for the purpose of services. For services, the GST rule says rate to be adopted is as per generally accepted accounting principles, which effectively means that we can adopt the same rate as recorded on the books, provided there is no significant variation. So we have a situation here where a company is there in both export of goods and export of services. For export of services, we can go by whatever rate we adopted in the books, the same rate we can adopt for GST purpose also. For goods, we will have one rate in the books. For the purpose of GST, we need to go by the customs rate. A plethora of problems, a plethora of differences, a plethora of reconciliations is a must, because we need to explain these differences. I think checking of the HSN and the rate that is applicable to it is of paramount importance. Most often what happens is we think for a particular HSN, the rate will be the same. It is not so. I will give you one example. There might not be many cases like what I'm saying about, but there could be a few cases and we need to be careful about it. You could have the same HSN but different rates of tax. Example, chapter 64, footwear. Footwear is taxed at 18%. However, if the maximum retail price of the same does not exceed rupees 1,000, the rate will only be 5%. Now, this was given by a notification. So, if you're doing the audit of a retail company which sells footwear as part of their retail products, and if they're selling footwear which costs less than 1,000 or also more than 1,000, while the HSN code will probably be the same, those which cost less than 5,000 should be charged at 5%, and those which are more than 1,000 at 18%. If they have collected on all the material at 18%, even then, I think we need to tell our clients about it because they're not being competitive enough. 2, if they have charged only 5% on everything, there is probably a GST liability which has been underreported, for which a provision is to be made along with interest and discharge to the government. So I think we need to look at some of the notifications issue, look at the HSN, see whether there is a possibility that the rate for the HSN could vary because of the notification issue, and then look at the product master that the client has created for each product. It is difficult, it is a time-consuming exercise, but it might probably be a one-time exercise which we need to ask the client to do it or ask the internal auditor to do it, or if we do it, we need to find out how we can be compensated for that. But it is something which we certainly need to do to see whether the amount of tax that is to be levied on the product at the time of sale has been properly captured by the accounting software used by the client in terms of the right rate being applied in the product master that has been created by the client. You have a client who gives discounts. Now, a trade discount is absolutely no issue. It is shown in the invoice, 1,000 rupees less 5% discount. Then there's a net figure on which GST charge. It gets closed right then and there. What I want to talk to you about is a cash discount. A cash discount is given. Taxable value is 10,000 rupees. GST at 18% is 1,800 rupees. The total is 11,800 rupees. The invoice carries a remark. A 2% discount will be allowed if paid within 30 days. The payment is received within a period of 30 days. Now a credit note has to be issued to the person who purchased it, to the entity which purchased it. The credit note that you will issue will be for 200 rupees, which is 2% of 10,000 rupees, plus 18% on that 200. So the credit note will be for 236. In other words, the GST impact of the discount gets accounted in both the books of the buyer and the seller. Now let us take another example, and the same example, another situation. At the time of issue of an invoice, nothing was mentioned in the invoice about a cash discount. 1 week later, the seller calls up the buyer and says, I will give you a cash discount if you settle within the next 5 days. And he settles the same 2% discount. At this point of time, a credit note cannot be passed for 236 rupees, but can be passed only for 200 rupees since the invoice did not carry a remark about discount. In other words, a pre-sale discount agreed to by the parties, then the GST impact on this can be accounted. If it is a post-sale agreement, GST cannot be accounted. The GST impact on that cannot be accounted. This is something which we all need to watch out for. More so in the case of our clients where a year-end discount is passed on. Typically, most manufacturers pass on a year-end discount to their wholesalers and to their distributors. They have an agreement entered into at the beginning of the year, wherein they say this is the amount of discount that we'll give you on the list price. However, if you reach an annual turnover of so much, in addition to the discount given to you for the list price, there are certain more percentage of discount is allowed. Now, there must be either an agreement between the parties involved in the transaction, or at least exchange of correspondence where it can be clearly evidenced and clearly demonstrated that it was not a post-sale thought and it was a pre-sale thought. If that is so, then the GST impact on those discounts given at the year end can be definitely accounted. If it does not exist, then obviously the GST impact on the discount cannot be accounted and cannot be taken credit of by both the parties. Check whether GST liability has been discharged on scrap sales. I think this is something which, right from the time of VAT and sales tax, we have had this problem. Quite a few times we noticed that GST liability is not discharged on scrap sales. Check whether the GST liability has been discharged on the scrap sales. Normally, when I look at the line item profit or loss on sale of fixed assets, or should I say property, plant and equipment, three things get triggered in my mind. But before I go into those triggers, let me point out that in Schedule 3 of the Companies Act, the word fixed asset is no longer there. I still come across several balance sheets, several financial statements where the word fixed asset is still available. Schedule 3 has been amended. It is no longer fixed asset. It is property, plant and equipment. The auditing standard has been amended. The accounting standard has been amended. It is no longer fixed assets, according to fixed assets. It is accounting for property, plant and equipment. We need to ensure that this correction is done by all of us in the financial statements that we are signing. Even in my own office, even yesterday when I was reviewing a financial statement, I found the word fixed asset because articulates are just copying the previous year file and doing it, which means this mistake has been there in the previous year also, which went unnoticed. This change has come in almost 2-3 years back. But we still find balance sheets coming with the word fixed assets instead of the word property, plant and equipment. I request all members to ensure that this mistake does not happen because it does certainly, I love to say this. Are there mistakes in the financial statement of signed? Yes, there are. Can anybody find that out prima facie by looking at it? No, they can't. And that's something which we certainly need to ensure. But if you have not followed the format to the extent that it needs to be followed, and there are apparent errors in the financial statements, then the impression that the reader of the financial statement gets, if this auditor has not even taken care to see that these things are not corrected, I am sure he would not have done a good job inside also. And therefore, I think we need to avoid that impression and ensure that we don't make errors which can be easily located or which can be easily found out. Coming back to profit or loss on sale of property, plant and equipment, there are three things that get triggered in my mind. One, the minute I see this line, I look at the property, plant and equipment schedule. The property, plant and equipment schedule must show this as a reduction from the gross value of the asset. The depreciated portion, the depreciation that we already claimed the asset should come out of the reduction of the depreciation statement. Has these two things been done? That's the first thing that I cross-verify. The second thing that I cross-verify is the gross value for which it was sold or the sale consideration received on the sale of that fixed asset. Has it been reduced from the depreciation, IT depreciation statement completely? From the block of assets, have that amount been reduced? Most often, in quite a few clients' case, every year on year when we do a review, we find that these things don't match. And it's already the 28th of September. Then we scurry around trying to see how these figures match. We need to have in our mind what are all the items that can get hit or get affected by this one line item in the profit and loss account. If we're able to bring that as part of our review system, then it becomes easier. So the first thing I will look at is the property, plant and equipment schedule. The second, I will look at the IT computation statement to see whether the value has been reduced in the block of assets. And third, if there is a cash flow applicable to that entity, I will look at the cash flow statement to see whether it has been properly disclosed the way it should be disclosed according to the accounting standard. In the GST regime, I don't stop with these three triggers. There is a fourth trigger coming into my mind. Has the GST liability on this particular sale of this particular asset, has it been discharged correctly? Now, the GST says where an ITC has been claimed on the capital asset, and if the asset is sold after 5 years, I don't have an issue. But if it is sold before a period of 5 years, then there is an ITC reversal to be done, and there is a transactional value on which GST is charged. I need to look at these two and find out whichever is higher and pay that. Let us look at an example in the next slide to understand this a little better. Cost of the capital asset purchased post GST regime is 10 lakhs. 18% ITC on that. The ITC that I availed or I've taken credit is 1,80,000 rupees. The maximum life of the asset as per the GST rules is 5 years. Whether the life is 3 years or 8 years is of no concern. GST rules say the value of the life of the asset is 5 years. If the asset is sold after 5 years, then they told you there is no issue. You will go with the transactional value. If the asset has been sold for X amount, you will calculate 18% of the X amount and discharge the GST liability. But if it is sold, let us assume after 3 years of use for 3,25,000 rupees. Now, the ITC to be reversed is 1,80,000, which is the original ITC availed, into 24, which is nothing but 2 years of residual life still left. 3 years is over, 5 years is the maximum life, so 2 years left. 24 is 2 years, which is 24 months, divided by 60, which is the maximum life of the asset. 5 into 12, 60, which works out to 72,000 rupees. The sale value is 3,25,000 rupees. The GST payable as per the invoice you will give to invoice that you will raise is 3,25,000 18%, which is 58,500. Higher of the two will be the GST liability. So which means you have to discharge 72,000 rupees as GST liability, although you will collect only 58,500 from the buyer of the fixed asset. You cannot ask him to pay 72,000 rupees. He will be willing to pay only on the transactional value. The agreed price is only 3,25,000. 18% of that will work out only 58,500. Therefore, he will only pay you 3,25,000 plus 58,500. The difference between the two is something which you have to pay and debit your P&L as rates and taxes. This is unavoidable, which we need to very clearly see and ensure that it is done. So when you look at this line item, profit or loss and sale of fixed assets, see whether there are any asset on which ITC has been claimed and whether they've been sold within a period of 5 years from the date of capitalization. If it has been sold, please look at it. Very often we will make mistakes on this. What is the position of the machinery is sold after 3 years and 13 days? Please note that as per the illustration given under GST rule 44(1)(b), a part of the month is to be ignored. So should I take it as only 3 years or should I take it as 3 years and 1 month? In the illustration that I just quoted to you in GST rule 44(1)(b), they have taken 15 days, not even 13 days. I am stating 13 days. They have not said if it is more than 15 days, should it be rounded out to the next higher thing, and if it is less than 15 days, should it be rounded out to the lower one. I, for one, would probably like to take it to the lower month, because by taking it to the lower month, there will be a higher GST to be discharged, and I would prefer to err on the wrong side and be safe rather than err on the right, take it to the higher side and then get into problems with the GST authorities. The reconciling of ITC expenses debited to profit and loss account may not always be a straightforward exercise. We could have situations where recoveries made are credited to the expense account. The nomenclature used in the profit and loss account may not prima facie trigger a GST liability. If I have made some income which is reflected on the credit side of the P&L, I will, as an auditor, definitely look at that and look at whether the GST liability on it has been discharged. But there are certain recoveries made which, instead of being credited to the profit and loss account, gets debited, credited to the expense account and gets netted off with the expense on that particular head. And therefore, as an auditor, I might not even look at it. In fact, it won't be out of place to mention that under the GST regime, the responsibility of an auditor has increased manifold, and one will have to go through each line item with a fine tooth comb to check compliance with GST. Example: recovery from staff for transport or canteen expenses are subject to GST. While I am doing the audit of the payroll functions of the auditee, I come across certain deductions which are not statutory deductions like PF, ESI and things like that. I suddenly find that there are deductions for canteen expenses or for transport. An alarm should sound in my mind. Has the GST liability on these recoveries been discharged properly? Have they been accounted for and discharged properly? This is something which we need to look at. In other words, again and again, the one point that I would like to emphasize is every line item in the P&L, we need to think for a minute whether this has a GST liability or not, either under forward supply or under reverse charge mechanism. There will be these items, if these recoveries are made from the clients, from the employees and are shown on the credit side, we might not miss it at all. Recoveries for the purpose of food or whatever, we might not miss it, but they will go and get credited to the staff welfare account where the canteen expenses are accounted. And therefore, there is all possibility that we may miss it. We need to be careful and we need to do a detailed examination before we can conclude our financial audit. Authority for advance ruling on Caltech Polymers Private Limited. The advance ruling which said canteen expenses required from employees is subject to GST. In fact, the auditor cannot afford to ignore any analysis, ignore analysis of even employee cost, because there are cases where I'm told notices have been served on companies saying why GST has not been charged for the notice pay recovered from the employees. If notice pay required from the employees can be subject to GST, then every line item in the financial statement, barring financial expenses, will be subject to GST. We as auditors need to be very, very clear that this has been discharged properly. In the pre-GST regime, where notice pay was subjected to service tax, there are two cases, including one from the Chennai High Court, which was ruled against the department. But some of the GST experts say that the language used in the service tax and the language used in the GST Act are different, and there could be a point or a case where the department's contention of GST on a notice pay required from the employee might be valid. It depends on when that notice pay was recovered. It depends on the contract between the employer and the employee. Once again, I would only like to tell you, if as an auditor I have to look at salary to find out whether there is any notice pay and whether that notice pay is liable to GST, just imagine what all I have to do with the other line items in the P&L. How careful I have to be, what kind of a detailed examination I need to do to the other line items in the P&L before I can conclude and sign off the financials of the entity that I'm auditing. While auditing a corporate or a partnership firm, you may come across a line item sponsorship fees. This payment is liable to RCM, and one needs to check if the liability has been discharged. The problem is compounded when the amount is debited to, let us say, marketing expenses account. Thus, every ledger in the account books should be reviewed. In Schedule 3, Companies Act Schedule 3, one is allowed to club various expenditure heads where the amount is less than 1% of turnover or rupees 1 lakh. We can club all these line items, small line items, and present it as a single line item. An auditor will have to drill down to check compliance with GST laws. Because I have a P&L, I have a schedule. Is it enough if we look at the schedules? No. Sometimes I have to go into the sub-schedules also because the schedule has combined several line items into one. So I might have to drill down to sub-schedules to see, is there anything in the nomenclature of the account which triggers an alarm in my mind regarding GST? Now we also do, at least I do, audit of several entities where we don't have a professionally qualified accounts department or a team of people. They are not even, forget being chartered accountants, they are not even probably BCom graduates, or they are BCom graduates who have just barely passed the BCom, without understanding what was taught in college, and they have learned more by experience from what the auditors have told them or the senior accountant has told them. They are prone to mistakes. They are prone to have an account head which you and me might not understand. They will use an account head which they understand, but you and me might not understand. So we need to understand what the head of item is, then decide whether the GST liability on it, and if so, check whether the same has been discharged. Legal charges, again subject to RCM. Security services. If security services are accounted under the head security services, it might be easy to capture. If they are accounted under factory maintenance, I have to drill down into factory maintenance and see whether there is a security services on which there could be a liability either on forward or on backward or on reverse charge as it been discharged. GST TDS. Unlike income tax, where the TDS has to be done at the time of credit of the invoice or payment, whichever is earlier, under GST, it is only at the time of payment. I have a situation where a client of mine has supplied goods to BHEL in January 2019. BHEL, in fact, 2 invoices were raised in January 2019. BHEL paid 1 invoice in February, on which they deducted GST, uploaded in March. I didn't have a problem. The other invoice they paid only after the year end. Now, do I account for the GST, TDS, or don't I account? It's very clear. The GST TDS is equivalent to cash, and it will go and sit in your cash register and be offset against the GST liability for the month in which it comes into your cash register. Unlike IT TDS, which I have to account at year end, because only if I account for it at year end will I get credit and I can offset it against the tax payable. The GST TDS, I don't have to do that. I will account for the GST TDS only in the month in which I receive the payment, and I find that the deductor has uploaded into the portal, and I have gone into the portal, checked whether he has uploaded it correctly, accepted it, and filed the return. As I told you earlier, the minute I click on the file button, 1 minute, within 1 minute, that amount comes into the cash ledger. So in this case, what we did was the GST which was paid the month of February, we accounted, because obviously that we could use that to offset the liability for the month of March. It came into the cash ledger in the month of March. We could use it to offset the liability for the month of March. But what was paid in April or May, as long as the payment was not received, we continue to show that amount as receivable from the party, from the debtor. It was not transferred to GST TDS account, because even if it did transfer to GST TDS account in my books, I cannot utilize it as long as it doesn't figure in the cash ledger in the portal, which it will figure only when the deductor is uploaded. Therefore, I continue to show it only in the debtor's account. These are things which can create differences, which can create problems. Look at them. In fact, it is imperative that the system is set up in the auditor's office for accounting for TDS. During this year's audit, we came across a case where TDS has been uploaded with a customer, but there's no sales invoice. We were looking at it. We were looking at the portal, GST portal. We found that there was an invoice on which tax has been deducted at source by the party who paid, and it figures. My client had neither accepted it nor had it come to his cash ledger. But the more important part of it is that invoice did not figure in the books of accounts of my client at all. Very simple case of simple error. This invoice was raised somewhere on the 20th of March this year. Software is not working properly. So, and it had to be, goods had to be dispatched that day. So they raised the invoice outside the software and sent it. The next day, pandemic stuck, lockdown began, people forgot about it. But obviously, the person who received the goods in the month of May had paid, deducted TDS. Because we looked into the GST portal and looked at a deduction of GST TDS and wanted to check that invoice, did we find that this invoice had been missed out? If we had not done that, we would have finalized the accounts with an understatement of income. Okay. These are things which we do, as post-balance sheet review. We always look at the cash book for the next 3 months to find out whether there are any expenses which should be provided for on 31st March. I think we also need to look at the GST portal and look at April, May, June at least, or till the date on which we sign off the financial, to see whether there are certain things which can help us look at things that could have been missed out in the financial books. Short receipt of refund. You can also have a case where there is short receipt of refund. When a refund claim is made, the rule says you must transfer the amount from ITC to refund receivable account. Has that been done correctly? Let's assume it has been done and the refund claim is made. A refund claim is made for 1 lakh rupees. For whatever reason, the department has sanctioned only 98,000 rupees and disallows 2,000 rupees as being ineligible. You can't claim refund for this expense or whatever. 98,000 rupees refund is received, it is credited to the refund receivable account. And they find you still find that the 2,000 rupees balance in the refund receivable account. The accountant will immediately transfer it to ITC, hoping that he can offset. No, he can't do that. It needs to go and hit the P&L as rates and taxes. It cannot go back to the ITC account. Because it is an ITC on which you ask for a refund, it is not granted due to whatever reason, it is no longer claimable as ITC and you cannot offset it. It has to go and hit the P&L account as rates and taxes. See whether that has been done correctly. While the financial statements of corporate mandates disclosure of aging analysis of receivables as outstanding for less than 180 days and other debts, there is no such requirement as far as payables are concerned. For the past couple of years, the only change that came in terms of trade payables is the trade payables have been split into 2: amounts due to small and micro enterprises and 2 amounts other than small and micro enterprises. Before I proceed further, again, this is a bifurcation of trade payables and they need to be shown on the face of the balance sheet in the case of corporates. If you are signing the financials of a private limited enterprise or a public limited enterprise, this trade payable split up of between small and medium enterprises and other than small and medium enterprises must be shown on the face of the balance sheet and not only in the notes. This amendment came in 4 years back. But even today, we come across cases where it is only shown on the notes and not shown on the face of the balance sheet. The fact that it was amended to say that it should be shown on the face of the balance sheet means it is something which we need to follow. Of course, if you don't have any trade payables at all, then that line item itself need not be there. But if the line item called trade payables in the balance sheet of a corporate, the split up between small and medium enterprises and others must be shown very clearly on the face of the balance sheet. Again, I would urge all of you to look at the financial statements of corporate that you have signed last year to see whether this is reflected. If it is not, please change it at least from this year. Coming back to the subject matter, debtors have to be split up. Aging analysis of debtors is essential. But is there an aging analysis of creditors? No. The creditors only split into small and medium and not small. But I think as an auditors, we must insist on our clients to do the aging analysis of creditors. The GST Act says if a creditor has not been paid within 180 days from the date of invoice, on the 181st day, the ITC must be reversed. Now, this is an ongoing exercise. While I stated just 2 minutes back that an aging analysis of creditors is a must as on the last day of the year, I think this must be an ongoing exercise, and we must help set up a system with our auditees to find out that, to ensure that this is done properly. If it has not been done, at least an aging analysis at the end of the year will help us understand that there are several accounts where payments have not been made for a period of 180 days. Let us at least look at those accounts and see whether the ITC has been reversed. If it has not been reversed, then we need to ensure that an ITC reversal is done or make a provision for it along with the interest from the date of the 180 on which the 181st day fell till the end of the year. If we don't do this and the amount is significant, it can have a serious impact on the financials we have signed. So please ensure that you do an analysis of the trade payables to see whether there is anything outstanding for more than 6 months, and if so, have the ITC been reversed. If not, provide for that ITC reversal and the liability because of the ITC reversal in the books of accounts. Of course, as an auditor, it is also a responsibility to see that when the bill is finally paid to the creditor, the amount is finally paid to the creditor, the ITC which is reversed is again taken back and claimed and offset against the taxpayer. Review of financial statements. I also like to look at state of long pending refund claims, which I already spoke to you in a few slides back. Look at the portal. The portal will definitely give us the idea, give us information whether the refund is rejected or the refund claim, there's something wrong with the refund claim, or the refund claim has been received, has been given, but not accounted for by the SSC, who has opened another bank account and put the money in there. All these things we can find out by looking at the portal. How do we disclose this GST liability and assets in the financial statements? Net of the GST liability with the ITC and the TDS and the excess cash paid, and the resultant figure is a credit, kindly show it under current liability, disclose it under current liabilities. If the resultant figure is a debit balance, then show it on the current asset side. In both these cases, if you are showing it on the liability side, you will say GST liability within brackets net of prepaid taxes, and if it is the asset, if it is the debit balance, you will show it on the asset side as GST ITC unutilized or to be set off within brackets, set off after set off of liability. I draw reference to this point from AS 22, which talks about how to disclose current tax provision and advanced tax paid or TDS. That's how they have to set off. But please remember, you can do the set off only if you have the right to adjust that ITC against the liability. If it is not so, then this has to be disclosed separately. You could have cases where there are branches of the audit you're using. You could have a payable in Maharashtra, whether there could be an ITC in let us say West Bengal. Both cannot be offset against each other, and therefore in that case, in that kind of a situation, you will have GST liability on the credit side. You will also have the GST asset on the debit side. Otherwise, as long as you have the right to set off the liability against the asset, please set it off and show it as only one net item, either on the liability side or the asset side. Now let's look at purchase of goods and services. Sometimes what happens is our clients also make an early claim of ITC just to ease their cash flow problems. An ITC which pertains to 1 month cannot be claimed. Okay, I'll put it in simple terms. A bill has been received in the month of January. On 28th January, I have received an invoice, but the goods I have received only on 3rd of February. I can account for the ITC only on 3rd of February and not earlier. and I can account for the 3rd of February and use it to discharge the liability of February month and not account it for the liability of January month. But invariably, most often than not, this is accounted on 28th January and not on February. The conditions for availing ITC is goods should have been received and you should have an invoice. Both are important conditions. So either the client wants to avail ITC earlier because of his cash flow problem and therefore does it, or it could also be, it may not be malified. The accounting department people are not aware of the right thing to do because, as I mentioned earlier, most of the small and medium sector clients that we have, at least that's the kind of clients that we have in our office, do not have a professionally managed accounting department. The knowledge is poor. The compliance with laws is also poor. So, which means there is an additional responsibility on us to check whether that these compliances have been done correctly. When you come to head office versus branch, for the sake of tallying the head office, the branch account on the books of the head office and the head office account on the books of the branch, the two accountants, or sometimes it happens only one accountant who is passing remotely entries and tally in both the places, passes the entry immediately so that it jibes. Goods have been dispatched on the 20th from the head office. It will reach the branch only on the 31st, on the 1st or 2nd of the next month, which means it can be accounted in the books of the branch only the next month and not on 28th. Again, can have serious implications. If this has been done regularly, huge invoices, every month it has been done regularly, it can have very serious implications. Look at it. Because that is the only way we can find out errors, ask the client to correct those errors, and at least educate them and bring them on to ensure that these errors do not occur anymore in the future. It's becoming a risk signing corporate accounts these days. At least let us watch out for these simple errors, or to the extent that we are aware of them, educate the clients to see whether we can eliminate them, if not reduce them. It is important to check whether the accounting policy followed by an entity as regards capitalization of plant, property and equipment has been correctly disclosed. During my 38 years of practice, I have referred to countless published accounts, discussed with peers and senior members of the profession before approving the final draft of the disclosure of accounting policies. Before referring to the published accounts and seeking clarifications from opinions from fellow professionals, one must be clear about the policy followed and must seek guidance for only the right language to be used for disclosing the policy. We have come across several cases where the policy has been copied verbatim from published accounts and reproduced without verifying whether it is in line with the policy followed by the entity that I am auditing. For example, let us take a look at these three policies which we have picked up from three listed companies. One is from Maruti, the other is from Tata, and the third is from Wheels India. Before we actually look at this three published disclosures, we will also look at AS10, elements of cost. Para 17, AS10 says, the cost of an item of property, plant and equipment constitutes or comprises A, its purchase price, including import duties and non-refundable purchase taxes, after deducting trade discounts and rebates. So it talks about non-refundable purchase taxes. In other words, it means if you cannot claim ITC on it, or if you're opting not to claim ITC on it, then it will be the entire value after debate. But if you're claiming ITC on it, then to that extent it must be reduced and only the balance can be capitalized. This is what the accounting standard says. Let us look at the Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Property, plant and equipment are stated at cost of acquisition. Nothing more. As a reader, I understand that they have not claimed ITC on their capital purchases. This is what I understand from the policy that has been disclosed in their published account. This is picked up from Maruti Suzuki India Limited 2020 financials. What does Tata Motors say? Cost, property, plant and equipment are stated at cost of acquisition Cost includes purchase price, taxes and duties. Again, they are not talking about any ITC on it. So I assume that Tata Motors Limited also have not claimed ITC on their capital purchases. Tata Motors Limited balance sheet talks about what comprises of purchase cost. Maruti Suzuki does not even talk about that. Come to Wheels India. Wheels India says property, plant and equipment is stated at acquisition cost net of GST credits as reduced by accumulated depreciation, which means Wheels India is claiming ITC on the capital asset. If your clients are claiming ITC on capital assets, you must have a sentence which is something very similar to what Wheels India has used and not something which is similar to Maruti or Tata Sons. As auditors, we often try to, instead of trying to spend time to frame the disclosure policy, what should be the exact disclosure to put in the account, we tend to copy from published accounts and reproduce it verbatim. If we do that, we could be making a big mistake because we don't know what the accounting policy of that entity from which we are copying is. What we understand, we need to spend time to read it, compare it to the accounting standard and understand what it means. In my opinion, of the three that I have listed there, Tata Motors and Maruti are not claiming ITC on their capital asset. Therefore, I cannot copy that figure, that disclosure and put it in the case of my client as disclosure, because in all my clients' cases, we are claiming or they are claiming ITC on capital assets. So we must avoid ambiguity. And this ambiguity is not only in the case of corporate audits, but all attached functions of financial statements. While the law may not mandate compliance with accounting standard for non-corporates, ICAI has made compliance with accounting standard mandatory for all its members. In other words, when you're attesting the financial statements of a non-corporate entity, a duty has been cast on you as a member of ICAI to ensure that the entity has complied with the applicable accounting standards. Hence, ensure that all accounting standards are disclosed and also issue an audit report even for non-corporates. How many of us actually issue an audit report for non-corporates? We need to ask ourselves this question and come up with an honest answer. Are we doing it? Are we just signing saying examined and found correct? Which is completely wrong. You can't do that. I think the practice has gone away, but there are still some things which, when we do bank audit, we come across financial statements signed, examined and found correct. When you sign it, it must be with reference to an audit report, even if it is non-corporate. Because for corporate, there's no question. Companies that are mandated that you must comply with accounting standards. Company that says you must have an audit report. But what about non-corporates? Do we need an audit report? Is 3CD alone sufficient? 3CD is a audit report which is mandated by the Income Tax Act. Is it sufficient? There's a divided opinion. Some say that it is sufficient. Some people say no, that is in addition to an audit report that needs to be issued for a non-corporate. I would like to draw your attention to SA 700, which talks about forming an opinion and reporting on financial statements. Please look at the last few pages of that auditing standard. Illustration 4, auditors report on non-financial statements of auditors report on financial statements of a non-corporate entity prepared in accordance with the fair presentation framework. It gives you the format. For the purpose of this illustrative auditor's report, the following circumstances are assumed. Audit of a complete set of financial statements of a non-corporate entity using a fair presentation framework. It is not a group audit. This assumption has been made and an illustration 4 has been given where there is an audit report for a non-corporate entity. Illustration 5 also talks about non-corporate entities for general purpose compliance framework. So please look at it and if necessary, issue these audit reports when you do the audit of non-corporate entities. Audit of property, plant and equipment. It is important to check the disclosure of accounting policies, which is what we looked at in the previous slide with regard to property, plant and equipment. The general rule is ITC is generally not available on motor vehicle for transportation of persons having approved seating capacity of not more than 13 persons, including the driver. So anything less than that, you cannot claim ITC. See whether it has been claimed or it has not been claimed. If it has not been claimed, you don't have a problem. If it has been claimed, you need to reverse it and provide for that liability along with interest. There are exceptions to the general rule regarding ITC on motor vehicles when they are used for making the following taxable supplies, namely further supply of such motor vehicles. That is, Maruti sells to its dealer, dealer sells to the ultimate owner. Then in that case, the dealer can take ITC, but otherwise he cannot take it. Or if it is used for transportation of passengers or for imparting training on driving such motor vehicles. The above general rule also applies to vessels and aircraft with the same kind of exceptions. Works contract. ITC on works contract. ITC is generally not available on works contract services, whether when applied for construction of an immovable property other than plant and machinery. You are doing the audit, you find in the property plan equipment schedule, you find that there is an addition to building. They have put up some new canteen or some new restrooms or a new storeroom there. They probably hired a labor contractor to do the construction. They have purchased material, cement, steel, and all other construction material have been purchased. Have they claimed the ITC on purchase of those materials? If they have claimed, it should be disallowed. You have to take it out and from that day, calculate the interest and provide for that line. Because ITC is not available on works contract services. ITC is also not available on goods and services or both received by a person for construction of immovable property. Whether you give the construction completely as a works contract or you buy the material and contract it, it's still not available. Now it might not be very easy to look at plant and machinery. As far as building is concerned, whether it is works contract or you buy the machine and you hire a labor contractor, ITC is not available. But ITC is available for plant and machinery. But you need to exercise care in case of certain plant and machinery. In general, lifts or elevators and centralized air conditioning plant are permanently fixed within the structure of any civil construction and assumed as an integral part of civil structure, and hence ITC cannot be availed. This was the view taken by Karnataka AR in some of the courts. Several rulings are available. Where a plan is given for a mall and the local authorities approve it subject to the condition that it has an elevator, subject to the condition it has a lift, subject to the condition it has a central air conditioning plant, which means these are essentials for the modern world. They are integral part of the building and cannot be capitalized as plant and machinery. Even if you capitalize plant and machinery for the purpose of your financial books, for the purpose of claiming ITC, you cannot claim ITC even on those plant and machinery goods. So again, something which we can look at while we audit property, plant and equipment. ITC on vehicles. ITC is generally not available on the following expenditure. In addition to ITC not being claimed on the capitalization, you cannot claim ITC even on the insurance you pay, the servicing or the repairs and maintenance. Which means when I look at vehicle maintenance line item in the profit and loss account, I will look at whether there are elements, whether the entire value of the bill that was received for vehicle maintenance, be it repair or be it servicing or be it insurance, as the ITC component as the GST component of those bills also been booked as an expense in the same ledger account without being taken away as ITC and accounted under ITC, because these are not available. They are not available. They are ineligible credits and therefore has to be reversed. They should not be accounted to the ITC at all in the first place. If the audit is accounted for as ITC in the first place, please ensure that they are reversed and also provide for the interest and the liability, taking into consideration the date of capitalizing. Please check all the facts before you take a final decision on availability of ITC in the case of property, plant and equipment. ITC is not available on the following supply of goods and services. Travel benefits extended to employees on vacation, such as leave or home travel concession. I am auditing salary, I have to look at it. Travel benefits extended will form part of my compensation package. It will be the employee cost in my ledger. So when I'm auditing employee cost, I need to look at whether there's anything paid, whether he gave some bills for reimbursement on which there is an ITC component, has it been claimed by the employee. Food and beverages supplied to employees, including outdoor catering, sweets and gifts distributed during puja. There will be a huge amount called puja expenses in the P&L account. Do they have bills for purchase of food stuff or sweets or gifts? Has the GST element of those bills been accounted correctly? Health service, beauty treatment, cosmetic and plastic surgery. Of course, I don't think we have much to do with beauty treatment, cosmetic and plastic surgery. Health services, and as the employee being given some health services because of the contract that we have with the employee. In fact, I am told today that some MNCs have employee contracts where they even allow for beauty treatment, cosmetic and plastic surgery. That is the reason why I included them here. I have no argument at all about a contract between the employer and the employee. Let them have any kind of contract. According to the contract, if they have to provide health service to them, let them provide. But have they accounted the GST portion on the health services correctly? In other words, they should not have claimed ITC. Have they claimed ITC? If they have claimed ITC, I need to correct it. If they not claimed ITC, I don't have an issue. Life insurance, health insurance, membership of clubs, health fitness centers, all these cases, you are not allowed to claim ITC, which means I need to look at salaries, I need to look at staff welfare very, very closely to ensure that none of those two line items do not contain any GST on which they have claimed ITC. If all the entire bill received from the vendors have been accounted, I don't have an issue. But if the entire bill has not been accounted, I certainly have an issue. So please remember that the input tax credit in respect of such goods or services or both shall be available where it is obligatory for an employer to provide the same to its employees under any law for the time being in force. Today, I think we have a law which says you must provide for sanitizers. You must provide for masks for your employees. Since it is mandated by law, the GST that I have paid on the purchase of the items, I can certainly claim credit for it. I can take credit for it. So we need to look at whether it is mandated by law. If so, ITC is available. If it is not mandated by law, ITC is certainly not available. Conveyance expenses. When you're auditing conveyance expenses, please check for amounts paid to hire a motor vehicle and check whether RCM liability has been discharged. When auditing corporates, check for this. Most often than not, quite a few of our clients hire cabs. If the bill from the cab hirer contains GST, there is no issue. If there is no bill, let me go back to, if there is a bill, there is an ITC, the GST of more than 5%, I don't have an issue. I can't claim, but I don't have an issue. But if it is only 5%, I need to tell the vendor, you don't have to charge. As a corporate, I have to pay to reverse charge mechanism, so don't charge me GST and pay under reverse charge mechanism. If it is available from individuals or partnership firm. That is, in other words, a corporate availing rent-a-cab services from individuals or partnership firms will have to discharge GST liability on reverse charge basis. Has this been done? Most of our clients, being small and medium enterprises, are not very familiar with RCM. RCM is not a concept that they understand. RCM is a concept that most of us don't understand. How do we expect the client to understand it? These are things that we need to check, especially when the amount is not very small. If it's very small, immaterial, I think I can afford to take a chance. But if it is not small, I don't think I can afford to ignore this. And these are not things which we should look at in GST audit. We should look for it in financial audit. During the course of financial audit, we should have a checklist for financial audit, recast. What we've been doing all these years might not be the correct checklist. We need to have a checklist where GST checklist is included in every line item in the P&L, and our articlers must be taught how to find out non-compliance with GST. travel and hotel accommodation. I had a strange case in one of our clients. The client traveled to Bangalore from Chennai, stayed in a hotel. Obviously, the hotel gave him an invoice with this man's GST number because he gave them the GST number, so they put the GST number. It was a Karnataka CGST and a Karnataka SGST. Promptly, the man came back and gave it to his accountant. The accountant accounted the bill. And thinking that the hotel in Karnataka had made a mistake of charging CGST and SGST instead of IGST, accounted that in IGST. Also claim credit for it. During the time of audit, we found out. And I said, why did you account to the IGST when it is actually CGST and SGST bills? He came up with a classic answer. Sir, how can a Karnataka hotel raise an invoice on a Tamil Nadu dealer under CGST and SGST? It should only be IGST. Now, he doesn't know that hotel can only raise a CGST and SGST bill. They cannot raise an IGST bill at all. This amount is also pretty huge because most of the clients, people only travel to Bangalore for all their clients are in Bangalore. So this particular client's marketing staff only travels to Bangalore. Amount was pretty high. We had to reverse it. We had to do the necessary corrections and ensure that the liability was discharged along with interest. These are all issues which not necessarily for any malintention on the part of the client, but due to ignorance of law, non-understanding of the GST concept, our client's accounting department indulge in these kind of transactions which will certainly put us in a problem if it goes unnoticed. And therefore, to that extent, every line item, as I love to keep on saying, every line item must be looked at in very great detail by the audit team and the audit staff. I think it is imperative that we need to have a training session for our own article clerks and our officers to ensure how to look at GST when we are doing financial audit. I will also do these reconciliations. Reconciliation of GST outward supplies. Month-wise for broad summary, and I will drill down in the case of discrepancy. What are the things I will look at? GSTR 3B and GSTR 3.1 of the books of accounts. What are the parameters I will verify? Liability of the particular financial year discharged in the same financial year. Liability of the particular financial year discharged in the next financial year, April to September, either through returns or through DRC channel. I have missed out an invoice to be accounted last year, found out during the course of audit. Can I upload it in this year before September monthly returns due? Yes, I can. Or at least through a DRC channel. Has that been done? That's what I look at. Liability not yet discharged. Is there a provision for it in the books? Does the financial statements reflect that there is a liability to be discharged? And is it available there? Liability to discharge in the wrong head? All these things I will look at. What about inward supplies? Same thing. GSTR 3B and GSTR 2A with the books of accounts. Instead of GSTR 1, it will be GSTR 2A. Parameters of verification. ITC of the particular financial year claimed the same financial year. ITC of the particular financial year claimed the next financial year, April to September, I can claim it. ITC not yet claimed, which is deferred because I don't have the bill or it does not figure on my 2A, whatever reason. Has it been deferred? Is it available? ITC not yet claimed lapsed. Something which should have claimed before September 2019, still not claimed. It lapses. Therefore, it should go and hit my P&L under the rates and taxes and cannot continue to be an ITC. Because if it continues to be an ITC, my current assets are being inflated. It is not the right figure. So my current assets are overstated, and to that extent, there is a mistake in the financials that I'm signing. It needs to go and hit my P&L. This is a look at the RCM structure. Taxes to be discharged in the reverse charge mechanism is a very important aspect of GST law. There are 8 goods on which taxes payable on RCM, like cashew nuts, tobacco leaves, silk yarn, raw cotton, etc. I am not going to the complete list of the 8 goods. I am only trying to look at 16 services on which tax is payable on RCM. Even out of the 16 services, I have listed out only about 9 services here, which are common for most businesses to ensure that we as auditors are aware of them while conducting the audit. Transport charges freight is the ledger head. Services rendered by the Goods Transport Agency. recipient, if there any one of the recipient, typically, literally every person who receives the services of good transport agency, GST liability is to be discharged on RCM basis. I don't think we'll have 90% of our clients will have transport charges unless it is a completely service oriented or we're doing the audit of some professionals or an engineering service company. All our clients will have transport charges of freight as the GST liability being discharged on RCM. Please look at it. Legal charges. If you find, forget legal charges, finding a line item called legal charge in the P&L account. In the contingent liability, when we talk about legal cases of the client has filed or is fighting, or some legal case has been filed against the client and they have replied to it, and we are making a contingent provision for which we ask the client to give us a list of all the legal cases for making a contingency provision. That should trigger a NAMA. Have you paid legal fees during this year for fighting any of these cases or for filing a case? If so, have you paid GST and RC? It might have been accounted of professional charges, or it could have been accounted even under miscellaneous charges. The amount that has been paid to the lawyer was not a very big amount. It could have been, by mistake accounted under miscellaneous charges or professional charges. Has the RC been signed? And either we have to look at those accounts very line by line, every transaction that has been recorded in the software we need to look at, or we need to keep our eyes and ears open when we look at contingent liability. And the client tells us that it is due to a case, it should immediately say, have you paid any legal fees? If you have paid legal fees, have you discharged liability in the RC? Arbitration. Again, we are looking at contingent, there is a case going on and the client tells us that it has gone to arbitration now. Believe me, no arbitration, none of the arbitrators start work without getting a lump sum amount at the beginning of the arbitration. The final amount is paid at the time of award of the arbitration. But certainly a lump sum amount which is huge, which is not in thousands, which is in lakhs, is paid at the time the arbitration starts, especially in big cases. So if an arbitration fee has been paid to an arbitral tribunal, any business entity located in the taxable sector, means typically all our clients, RCM liability comes in. Have they done that? Similarly, sponsorship I spoke about, which we looked at. Project expenses, transfer of development rights. Promoter of the project has to discharge it under recipient. As a recipient, he has to discharge the liability under RCM. Lease rentals. Payments made for long-term lease of land, more than 30 years for construction of the project, paid upfront. This lease rental is paid upfront to any person. Who pays it? The promoter of the project. Then he has to discharge the GST liability under RCM. Payment to directors. Any payment made to a director, not in his capacity as an employee. So if you have non-executive directors from whom you are paying some amount, it definitely becomes payable under RCM. It is liable under RCM. Sitting fees placed to directors, liable under RCM. Security services. Any person other than a body corporate. If the security service is rendered by a body corporate, there is no issue because they would have charged on forward supply. But it is a person other than the body corporate, any registered person located in the taxable territory will have to discharge it on RCM. Conveyance expense, renting of motor vehicle, which we again saw, any person who renders that services, the body corporate located in the taxable service in the territory must discharge the liability on RCM. So if you are doing the audit of that body corporate, you need to look at whether it has been discharged under RCM. ITC on job workers. When you send the material for job work, you can claim ITC. Section 19 says, principal shall be entitled to take credit of input tax paid on inputs sent to job workers for the job work. Provision also provides the principal can take the credit even when the goods have been directly supplied to the job worker without bringing to the premise of the principal. I am the principal. Material is sent from, at my instant, material at my direction, material is sent from my supplier to my job worker, I can still claim credit. I receive the goods and send it to the job worker, I can still claim credit. The only thing needed is I must have evidence that it was delivered to me. What is the time limit for returning of the goods to the principal? Inputs and capital goods after processing shall be returned to the principal within 1 year or 3 years respectively of their being sent out. If it is not received in 1 year or 3 years, ITC has to be reversed. Check whether this is done or whether it is, if it has not been done, if it has not been reversed, then to that extent, we need to provide for that. That brings me to the end of looking at financial statements. What about director's report? Expenditure in foreign currency, paid for services. There is the disclosure we made in the director's report for expenditure in foreign currency. And does it have anything for paid for services? If there is paid for services, is there an RCM? There will definitely be an RCM liability. Has it been discharged? Earnings in foreign currency, export earnings or any earnings. Check whether an LUT, letter of undertaking, has been filed. If it has not been filed, the same needs to be filed immediately. Ask the client to request the client to file one immediately, and also a petition for condoning the delay. If the petition for condonation of delay is rejected, I think that's the point of time in which I as auditor is in a fix. Do I take the stand that this, since the LUT has not been filed, and an application of filing condoning delay has also been rejected by the department, do I take the stand that it is something on which tax should have been paid? That's a professional judgment on the part of every auditor. A very difficult decision to take, but we need to take that call. Maybe we need to talk to other senior professionals and other the people in the same industry to see whether have they come across something like this, and what are the stands they took before looking at taking a stand on that. GST on remuneration director other than salary, again under RCM, has it been discharged? GST on sitting fees, definitely under RCM, has it been discharged? All these things we can find out from the director's report, because these figures are disclosed in the director's report, even if they are buried in some line item in the GL. Since these figures will be put up there in the director's report, we have a clue to those figures, and we can spend a little more time looking at it. The corporate buys tables, chairs, smart TV, black and white boards as part of its CSR activities. Now, all these purchases, there is a GST element. Have they claimed ITC on those GST? In my opinion, they should not claim it. And I also have the ICAI technical guide on accounting for expenditure on CSR, para 30, which states indirect taxes like GST, excise duty, VAT, or other applicable taxes on the goods and services so contributed will also form part of CSR expenditure, which means it cannot be taken. So if you have a company where they are having CSR expenditure, check whether the CSR bills or expenses incurred for CSR activities, the GST component of this has ITC has not been claimed. If it has been claimed, ask them to reverse it. To that extent, you may have to make a provision for interest for the delayed payment of the tax of that particular month. Auditor, as I was telling you, you may need to qualify or mention in the emphasis of matter paragraph material impact. Amount is not material, don't worry. There's nothing to do about it. But if the amount is material, due to these 3 or 4 circumstances I listed below, unreconciled, unexplained differences in turnover as per books and as per GST. As long as you have a reconciliation, you don't have anything to worry about. But if there is no explanation, or there is unexplained, there is a reconciliation, but we are not able to explain the differences between books and GST, and the amount is material, there is one situation. 2, underbooking of GST liability due to wrong rate, where they should have applied 18% rate, they have applied 12% rate, therefore the underbooking of GST liability. Claiming of ineligible ITC, hotel bills, air travel, train, all which carry the SGST and CGST of some other state, claimed in the state in which the authority is carrying on business, ineligible ITC, or claiming of ITC on motor vehicles purchase. There are several ineligible ITC, and they claimed all that, and the amount is material. Export of goods and services without filing LUT. The year is over, they still haven't filed an LUT. These are cases where you might have to decide on qualify, or at least have an emphasis of matter paragraph. Very, very clearly, a professional judgment has to be exercised. A lot of thought process to go into it, and you will be in a tight situation where it is not easy to take a decision, but you have to certainly take that decision. If the amount, let me repeat, is material, if the amount is small, ask them to discharge the liability, pay it on the day on which you are signing, and the DRC 03, account for it and be done with it. But if the material is, if the amount is material, does it call for at least a note in the account? But a general note in the account by itself is not going to absolve you. By putting a note in the accounts, actually you will be inviting trouble for yourself. If you put a note, ensure that the emphasis of the matter paragraph. If possible, quantify the effect of it. Just saying a note that the GST, the turnover as per GST does not relate with the turnover as per books of account or the P&L will only put you into problem more than it will put the assessee into problem. For the registered dealer, the problem is only discharging liability. For us, it is going and standing before the disciplinary committee of the Insurance Chartered Accountants of India, which we certainly want to avoid. Therefore, please don't just put a simple note and say and think that we can get away with it. We can't. We need to look at it. Let me shift my attention to Caro. Paragraph 3.3. The question there is there a physical verification of inventory conducted at reasonable intervals by the management, and whether any material discrepancy were noticed, and if so, whether they have been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. Let us look at the answers from 3 listed companies. Again, Tata Motors, Wheels India, and Maruti Suzuki is what I have taken. Tata Motors says the discrepancy noticed on verification between physical stock and book records were not material and have been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. Please read the question again. Whether any material discrepancy was noticed, and if so, whether they have been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. Caro says, is it material? If it is material, has it been dealt with in the books of accounts? What does Tata Motors say? It was not material, but they have been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. Because the guidance note of ICAI says, although Caro says only you have to report it only if it is material, ICAI guidance note says even if it is not material, there is a discrepancy. Has it been dealt with properly in the books of accounts is what we need to state. And that is what Tata Motors stated. Same thing has been said by Wheels India. Discrepancies noticed on verification, which were not material, have been properly dealt with. And third, Maruti Suzuki. Discrepancies noticed on physical evidence as compared to book records were not material and have been properly dealt with. So typically we have 3 major public limited companies in the country, all of them saying that there was a difference between physical inventory and book inventory. They were not material. However, they have been properly accounted for in the books of accounts. I think most of us also normally put this line. Physical has been conducted reasonably by management, and the discrepancy between book stock and physical stock has been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. Not material and have been properly dealt with in the books of accounts. This is what we all do. Under the GST regime, I'm scared to even put this, because the minute I put this, I am admitting, I am saying, which I have to admit, I'm not saying I should not admit, I have to admit, I am admitting that there have been certain stock which have been written off because there was either lost or damaged or stolen for whatever reason. It is duty, I am duty bound to look at whether the ITC on those items have been reversed. Because the Act says you have to reverse those ITC. Has that been done? That is something which I need to look at. So when I answer this question, I must definitely look at that. Please remember that this question in Caro we should trigger an immediate reaction to ask the audit staff or look at the books of the client to see whether ITC has been reversed. How far we have done this in all our clients' case itself is a moot question, but we need to certainly look at it and take a call. This is the question, paragraph 3.7a. Statutory dues, undisputed statutory dues, have they been properly deposited with the concerned authorities? Although we're talking only about GST, there are other concerned authorities like PF, ESI, insurance, income tax, whatever. Have they been, we're talking about undisputed statutory dues. Have they been paid to the appropriate authorities without any delay? If not, what is the extent of arrears outstanding for a period of more than 6 months? This is what this question asks. Now, undisputed means if you say it is disputed, then you must have proper records report is disputed. Just saying I don't agree is not enough. You filed an appeal, process should have been started, something should have. So in most cases, they are often undisputed tax, undisputed tax pending. Normally, I find that if you look at 1,000 balance sheets, published accounts, I mean, even today you can even download a private limited company's notes on accounts and balance sheet. So nothing is sacrosanct any longer. Under the previous companies law regime, private companies, profit and loss account you can't see. Today, even that you can see. So there's nothing sacrosanct about any of these documents which are put on the public portal. All you need to do is pay a fee and download. If you take a look at about 1,000 balance sheets and audit reports and the entire gamut of annual report, for this question, about 90% of the answers will be the undisputed statutory dues, including so and so, have generally been regularly deposited with the appropriate authority. What do we understand with this term generally regularly deposited? If you look at the guidance note issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, they have not used this word generally at all. By saying generally regularly deposited, we are saying we are not clear whether there have been a delay, or we are trying to couch that there has been a delay, but what is the delay we are not telling you. That is not the intention of CARO. CARO is a statement of fact. I am supposed to disclose exactly what is happening. Let us look at what the ICAI guidance note says on. ICAI guidance note says there are 4 situations that can arise for this particular question. 1, regular payment. By regular payment, they mean all the 12 months, all the statutory dues were paid before the due date. 2, generally regular, but slight delay in a few months. In other words, they say out of 12 months, maybe 2 months or 3 months, there was a delay of 2 or 3 days. The remaining 9 months, it is paid exactly, all dues are paid before the due date. See, not regular, but delay not serious. More than 50% of the month, that is about 7 or 8 months, they did not pay on time, but they paid within 2-3 days or maximum 4-5 days from the due date. That is situation C. Situation D, not regular and serious delay. No month did they pay on time, and the delay was not 5 days, 6 days, but weeks or months. The ICAI guidance note on CARO for the 4 above situation warrants different answers. The concept of materiality is definitely to be kept in mind. If there is one small amount which is not paid, we might not call for major difference, but if the material amount is material, then you have to choose an answer depending on which situation your auditee falls under. If it is regular payments, you have to say have been regularly deposited with the company. Generally regular, but slight delay in a few months, then you have to state undisputed statutory dues have been regularly deposited by the company with appropriate authorities, though there has been a slight delay in a few months, in a few cases. Not regular, delay not serious, you have to state have not generally been regularly deposited with the appropriate authorities, although the delay in deposits have not been serious. Not regular and serious delay, GST and GST have not been regularly deposited with the appropriate authorities, though there have been serious delays in large number of cases. I would only beseech all of you to ensure that this is done. By putting a note saying generally regular and depositing, whom are we defending? We think we are defending our clients. Today, under the era of digitization, if there is any query from any department, all these things get thrown up. Under the face-test assessment, there are areas today we can be asked to send the backup of the software that we are using. The departments have all softwares, all accounting software. So they just run it to see whether what we are saying is right or wrong. We can defend our clients only if we don't get into trouble. So we need to be safe, and to that extent, let us be very clear in both CARO and in 3CD that the facts are clearly stated. Statutory dues, undisputed statutory dues outstanding for more than 6 months. This is the format which has been reported. Again, this is not a format that I have suggested. It is a format available in the ICAI guidance note. Where there is disputed, then how do we disclose the disputed tax? GST dispute is there. This is the format. Check for disclosure of contingent liability also. If you have anything to report in this format, Also check immediately, because that's the link between this format and the contingent liability, whether a provision has been made under contingent liability. Related party disclosures. This is a very interesting thing in the notes on account that we can look at to find out GST compliance. We must remember one thing, that all reimbursements are not subject to GST. Expenses such as boarding and lodging incurred by the holding company when employees of the Indian subsidiary travel abroad on official work may not be subject to GST reimbursement, because this is met by the holding company, and then they ask for reimbursement from the Indian subsidiary. This will be reimbursement of expenses, provided there is no profit element and is backed up with proper evidence to show that it is exactly back to back, there is no profit element, then they may not be liable to, in fact, I would say they are not liable to GST and RCM. However, if the holding company enters into a global contract with a vendor to sell for, say, leased lines or AMC for hardware or software maintenance and requires from the Indian company their share of the cost, which is worked out very scientifically and without any margin or reimbursement of expenses, it will still be liable to GST under RCM. I would like to impress upon all of you that every line item in the PL and every disclosure of the notes and director's report needs to be examined specifically from the point of GST compliance. Check for observations in internal audit report. We have often come across financials with notes regarding non-confirmation of receivables, non-confirmation of payables, reconciliation pending in respect of certain items, etc. This is there in the notes on account. However, in the report on IFC, there is no qualification, there is no observation. On the one hand, on the notes on account, we have stated that these are all pending. On the other hand, in the IFC report, we stated it is clean. This is contrary to each other. We are contradicting our own statements. We make one statement and contradict it in some other report. Dangerous situation. It actually puts us in problem. Please state so, even in the IFC report, that it was not correct. There were weaknesses in internal financial control. However, those internal control weaknesses have been rectified by the year. It is better to state that than to give a clean internal clean IFC report. Mention all the GST numbers that they have got in the country under this question number 4. Depreciation schedule. Please again look at the capitalization policy, see whether it is inclusive of GST or exclusive of GST in the books. If it is inclusive of GST, here also it should be inclusive of GST. If it is exclusive of GST, it should be exclusive of GST here also. You can't claim ITC in the books. So for the purpose of books, you claim you are capitalizing, taking out GST component and claiming ITC on it. But for the purpose of book depreciation, income tax depreciation, you take the total value into the GST. That's not right. It's again, the minute I look at depreciation, I will also look at new capitalization and also look at the GST income tax computation for depreciation to check whether the two figures are the same. Again, something which we need to build into our article works, that they are able to cross-verify and cross-index an item with some other item that they've already prepared, or they are likely to prepare a little later on and see whether it is done. Question 21A of report 3CD talks about amounts debited to profit and loss account being in the nature of capital, personal, wherein one of the items is club fees, both as entrance fee and part of club services. Now, most often it happens that they are business expenses in nature, but the insured guidance note says it has to disclose there, although it is not personal in nature, and therefore we are all disclosing it. That 143, they make adjustments and add it back is a different matter. But what I want to point out is the minute you say that there is something of a personal nature and you disclose in the tax audit report, please check whether the ITC on that GST component of it has been reversed. That is something which you need to see, because GST authorities are going to pounce on this and say you should not have claimed ITC on that. So just check whether that has been done. Let us take a simple example for understanding this year-end adjustment increase. Provision for rent for the month of March. Invoice is dated April. In such a situation, ITC can be accounted for only in April, and hence provision should be made exclusive of GST. Whereas provision for services are waived. The onus of discharging GST liability is under RCM, is on the entity, and hence it should be provided inclusive of GST. The same principle will apply in respect of various provisions made for services received from domestic vendors where GST liability is on RCM basis. So we could have situations where certain year-end adjustment provisions made will be exclusive of GST and certain should be inclusive of GST. We need to again look at this thing little more carefully than what we are looking at, because if we don't do that, we could actually put ourselves in a bit of a spot. Dear friends, I certainly thank you for patiently listening to me for almost 2 hours now. And finally, to conclude, a very strong foundation in auditing, which we all have, with an ability and desire to look beyond the nomenclature of the accounting head. Irrespective of the nomenclature that the accountant has used in the ledger, we need to understand transactions behind that nomenclature. And we should always not assume that this is what this head means, especially when the head is something which we don't come across on a daily basis, or in most of our clients' cases. We need to understand from that accountant what does he mean, because today's accountants, especially the accountants in Tamil Nadu who are coming out from colleges, passing their BCom, are not good enough to do accounting. I'm sorry to say this, but I have to state it. So we have to be careful. So if you are able to look beyond the nomenclature of the accounting head and the figures associated with it, coupled with an in-depth, if not expert knowledge on GST. I am no expert on GST, so you don't necessarily have to have an expert knowledge of GST, but you need to have a working knowledge of GST. It will play a major role in finalization of accounts, taking into consideration the impact of GST on the accounts. Literally every item in the financials, barring cash and bank balances and maybe share capital, is loaded with the GST issue and hence cannot be ignored. I would just like to add one more thing before I finally conclude. When we talk about auditors' skepticism, I think that skepticism that all of us have must increase manifold when auditing.
Photo cut do photo cut.
Hello? The skepticism of auditor must increase manifold while auditing and finalizing in the GST era. Thank you so much for having me here with you in your chapter and listening to me patiently for the last 2 hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh sir. Thank you very much. Amish, you are taking forward?
You can take.
Okay. Thank you, Ramesh sir. Sir, it was a fantastic deliberation, and I am very overwhelmed by the passion of knowledge and passion of learning, sir. And you are of my father's age, and at least you have motivated me a lot today. That कि आपको मेहनत करना है, knowledge लेना है, and your deliberation has literally served, has been of immense good for the members of our study circle, sir. Sir, we have certain questions for you in the chat box, and we will take it one by one, sir.
Sure. In fact, just to add to what you said, I'm as old as your father.
Yes.
When I did my CF final, qualified, we didn't have accounting standards, we didn't have auditing standards. We had to learn all that or read all that only as we progress in the profession. So,
okay, right, absolutely.
Reading is a non-ending exercise in our profession.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Sir, now one question is from Mr. Puranchand Khimka ji, and now his question is that is there any GST liability? Is there any GST applicability in case we have taken income in terms of forfeiture of retention money related to a contractor?
Retention money, forfeiture of a contract. Okay. I don't think, again, let me all put that disclaimer again. I am not an expert on GST, so I won't say that this answer that I'm going to give you is the right answer, but in my personal opinion, I don't think that the GST liability, because there is no rendering of a service in this case, and therefore there should not be a GST liability. But if I can give the answer to this after talking to my indirect tax partner, tomorrow and
Okay.
send a mail to the branch. Please let me know which mail ID you should send it to. I will certainly send a reply to this. Either the reply that I gave you is right now, or if it is not, I will send you a confirmation for this.
Okay, sir. Okay, not a problem, sir. We'll share you the mail ID, sir. And now one question is from Mr. Mr. Amin Keshwani. And now his question is, can ITC be claimed on airfare?
It is, in my opinion, again, if let us say you are in Maharashtra, you have to purchase an air ticket, and the GST charge there is Maharashtra CGST and SGST or IGST, you can claim. But if you take a flight from, let us say, Maharashtra to Delhi, Bombay to Delhi, and from Delhi you take a flight to Calcutta, or any other place where they are not charging you IGST, but they are charging only CGST or SGST of that state, then obviously that cannot be claimed.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. And now next question is from Mr. Aditya Maheshwari. Now his question is whether RCM is applicable on rent paid to directors.
No, sir. No.
Okay, sir. Okay, fine enough, sir. Sir, so all the questions are over, sir. And now I request CA Nikhil Porwalji, our core committee member, to give a formal vote of thanks to CA Ramesh ji. So over to you, Nikhil ji.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak, and thank you, Ramesh ji, for a very, very lucid presentation. I think if this presentation is made available, Aditya and Deepak and Amish, this should be shown to each and every staff member of our audit team of every office, because it is so detailed that once looked into this and all these points are taken care of, then I don't think we should have a problem in finalizing any of our financial statements. So thank you very much, Ramesh ji, for giving this very, very lucid presentation. And thank you everyone for coming today and making this event a very, very successful one. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Next virtual CPE meeting of Andheri Oshiwara Study Circle will be held on 13th September, that is on Sunday, and it will be held from morning 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Now the entire webinar will be distributed into two parts. The first part will be on financial literacy, okay, and that will be taken by CA Tikam Rajkumarji Rohida, and he is coming from Ahmednagar. And the second topic is tools for chartered accountants in practice to increase their productivity. And we have got one more good speaker from Hyderabad, and his name is CA Saran Kumar. So I request all the members to register in large numbers and take the benefit of learning. And once again, I thank you all the members to have come on Sunday morning and taken the benefit of learning. Thank you very much, and we now close the webinar. Thank you.